That was a new alert animation. It scared me a little bit. Maybe we should be scared.
I'm determined to ensure that the ceasefire is sustainable. Both sides must adhere to the agreement. At the same time, the underlying issues must be addressed. More than ever, we need the negotiated two-state solution, ending the occupation and the conflict. This is critical to regional stability. A just and comprehensive peace is our ultimate goal, and it is the only way to bring lasting security to all.
This is a Debka File special presentation. The 8-day Gaza duel between Israel and Hamas was the showcase. Behind it, a coup went forward, masterminded by at least 3 intelligence wizards: Israel's Mossad director, Tamir Pardo, Turkish National Intelligence Organization, MIT chief Hakan Fidan, and the Qatari Prime Minister, Sheikh Jassim Al Thani, who also heads the Emirates Intelligence Service. Their aim was to abort the military ties Tehran was cultivating with Hamas before the Gaza Strip is grabbed as Iran's springboard to Cairo. To this end, multiple missile assaults on Israel were provoked. The coup action was designed as part 1 of U.S. President Barack Obama's overall plan to harness the Arab Spring to key U.S. objectives. His partners were and are Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi, Turkish Premier Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Obama's next stop is Syria. If Israel's Operation Pillar of Defense worked, a new future was charted for the radical Hamas terrorists, their transformation into the legitimate voice of the Palestinian people. Anyway, Hamas is the most popular faction on the Palestinian street at large. In the short term, Tehran was to be vividly instructed in the fate awaiting its Arab allies. Hezbollah was destined to follow next after Hamas, notwithstanding the tens of thousands of rockets with which Iran has filled its armory. For these objectives, Israeli ground action was not necessary at any stage of the Gaza operation. Its opening shot was a bullseye, eliminating Hamas' military commander, the pro-Tehran Ahmed Jabari, and Iran's kingpin in Gaza. Iron Dome stole the show by knocking out most of the 1,000 missiles launched from Gaza before they hit town centers. Israel lost 6 dead. Many of the injured were shock victims. So was the coup strategy played out in Gaza a success? Time will tell. Israel has meanwhile begun easing its land and sea blockade on the Gaza Strip. Turkey and Qatar are committed to major investments in the Gaza economy to make it more prosperous than the rival West Bank. The U.S. and Egypt are to cooperate in stemming the flow of smuggled Iranian arms to Gaza. A million things could go wrong along the way. However, the same coalition has meanwhile shifted its sights from Gaza to Syria.
Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. Today is Thursday, November 29th, 2012, and I'm Darko. The first news article I have for you is the UN General Assembly votes in favor of Palestine upgrade. So, I guess this is the biggest news I have for you besides that video that a viewer sent me. Pretty good video. The Gaza operation less a war than an anti-Iran coup. So they're doing a good job. The West is, as far as claiming that Iran is the big winner in all this. Even Iran, when you check out Press TV, is saying that the Gazans are thanking them. But under the scenes, it was a big loss for them and a big win for the West. So, alright, so I'm going to cover the Middle East in this news series. All the links will be posted in YouTube's video description. So the UN has voted 138 to 9 to upgrade the Palestinians' status or Palestine's status from observer entity to observer non-member state. So, you know, people could ask, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I mean, who observes the United Nations? I mean, why do they get observer or member state status, right? States shouldn't have to ask other states for recognition. And it's just interesting that if Hamas was kind of split, but see, this is what they're not talking about, was that the point of this Operation Pillar of Defense and that was to get Hamas, the controlled opposition that was always controlled opposition, more pro-Israel or pro-West than pro-Iran before the Palestinians went to basically do this vote. So next up, the PLO rejects U.S. demand to prohibit war crimes against Israel. The U.S. pushed Palestine to add a clause in the UN bid barring war crimes charges against Israel. So they asked, what are they afraid of? They refused demands from Washington that it soften the words or the wording of the proposed UN resolution regarding the recognition of the Palestinian state. Children face the fallout of the Gaza war as Israel and Hamas separately celebrate the ceasefire and their, quote, victory over the other following Israel's blistering 8-day military assault on the Gaza Strip. Civilians continue to pay the price. More than 160 Palestinians lost their lives by November 21st. It goes on here and it says that the dead included at least 103 civilians, 33 of them children. More than 1,000 Palestinians were wounded, including 971 civilians and 274 of them children. Also, 3 of the Palestinian civilians killed were journalists who died after repeated Israeli attacks on media buildings. In fact, the media or journalist Watchdog urges UN probe of deliberate Israeli attacks on journalists, said that Israel repeatedly targeted TV and newspaper offices. The International Federation of Journalists, a major international watchdog group aimed at preventing censorship and intimidation of the media, has called on the UN to launch a formal investigation into the deliberate targeting of journalists during this month's Gaza war, followed by Operation Pillar of Cloud, why Israel still emerged the victor. So it says here that commentators across the spectrum are talking this week about how Hamas was the real victor of the latest conflict, even though Gaza disproportionately felt the cost of advanced military bombardment. It goes on here and says that here's this combiness in foreign affairs as an example. Now Hamas will tout the concessions it won from Israel last week as part of a ceasefire. Israel agreed to open up the border, suspend its military operations, and end targeted killings. It says the latest part is important. It says if Hamas gains enough popularity to sideline Fatah, we can say goodbye to the visibility of a two-state settlement. Fatah's infamous deterrence to the U.S. and Israel to the peace process, which was always just a scheme to provide Israel with more time to colonize additional Palestinian land, has not won them many emphatic fans. And in this sense, Fatah has been useful to Israel. It says they represent the greatest threat to Israel's plan to have permanent sovereignty over all historic Palestine, everything west of the Jordan River. So they openly support a two-state solution, and it says here that recent bids to get recognized at the UN are among Israel's greatest concerns. Now here we go. Since the PLO are nonviolent, Israel can respond with plain old brute force the way they do with Hamas. That's why it's good controlled opposition. Hamas, that is. With Hamas, Israel can easily demonize any sort of Palestinian resistance and boil down the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to an Israel versus the terrorist dichotomy. It says Israel bolstered Hamas from the beginning. 1973, disappearing Palestine. Jonathan Cook wrote about 6 years after the occupation began, Israel licensed the Muslim Brotherhood, allowed them to set up a network funded by the Gulf states. But eventually, what happened is that it turned into or morphed into Hamas in 1987. It says, but with the possibility of the PLO achieving non-state status at the UN, nonviolent nationalism towards the two-state solution looks like the greater of two evils to many in Tel Aviv. It says this is why Israel still emerged the victor after the aftermath of Operation Pillar of Cloud. It says that Hamas, on the other hand, is a straw man. They can more easily be dealt with in the way that Israel is used to dealing with the Palestinians with crushing brute force. But the Fatah leadership in the PLO has international appeal and may very well make headway at the UN. It says, and so long as U.S. support for Israel is maintained, that is what Israel will continue to do. It's talking about basically crushing brute force. You can go in there and check out these links. This one I'll go over it briefly. Is Hamas really a surrogate of Iran? We've been hearing that a lot. Hamas as Iranian puppet narrative gets help from the American media. It says, is Hamas a puppet of the Iranian regime? An affirmative answer to this question is, from the point of view of Benjamin Netanyahu, a dual-use rhetorical technology that helps justify the recent bombardment of Gaza. It says here, the goal of the operation was to deplete an Iranian-supplied missile stock that Iran could, in theory, activate against Israel in the event of war. See, that was a big deal. So this also weakens Iran. It helps justify Netanyahu's uncompromising stance towards Iran. It's certainly true that Hamas had and still has lots of Iranian-supplied missiles, but this past year has seen developments that changed the relationship, especially when they assassinated the Hamas leader after the Israelis had already pretty much brokered a peace deal, ceasefire deal agreement, and then they killed and assassinated the Hamas leader that was pro-Tehran, pro-Iran, and that's when it struck it off, and then they got a change of leadership. And in Syria, they're talking about in Syria, Hamas ended its relationship with Syria regime and moved its leadership out of Syria, so in strained relations with Syria, but also with Iran. And remember, I covered this as Reuters article about in Syria, there was these Hamas offices, and basically people that were pro-Syria or pro-Iran in Hamas in Syria were being attacked. And Syria is a key state that needs to go down before anything does happen with Iran, if it does, if that's really part of the plan or it's just rhetoric. Obama wants more military aid to Israel after a ceasefire. He's pledged to boost Washington's military and financial aid to Israel after a ceasefire agreement. Said in a phone conversation with Netanyahu on November 21st, Obama reiterated that the U.S. will remain committed to Israel's security. No questions asked. American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, lobbies guarantee billions of dollars in military aid for Israel each year. Israel receives about $3 billion from the United States in direct foreign assistance each year, which is roughly 1/5 of America's foreign aid budget. It's also one of the most in the entire world for such a small country. Jewish Christian groups clash over U.S. aid to Israel. This is from October 29th. The Jewish groups have reacted furiously to a letter to Congress by 15 leaders of Christian denominations asking for a review of whether some of the $3 billion in annual U.S. aid to Israel is being used in violation of U.S. law and policies. Now, NATO is preparing Psy-Ops in Syria. Many have heard this about the internet being shut down, and it was the government that shut it down, and that the government was blaming it on the rebel terrorists. It says here, internet connections and telecom reportedly failing across Syria right as NATO has finished preparing their proxy SNC and readies for final push. So in early summer, NATO had attempted to overwhelm Damascus and Aleppo with the torrent of psychological operations, or Psy-Ops. It says here, communication disruptions, foreign terrorists crossing Syria's border, mostly Turkey, and a devastating assassination of top Syrian officials in the heart of Damascus. The idea was to cause panic, division, mass defections, and fold the Syrian state, when in reality it was more than able to fight on. Syria called the bluff, and here it still stands. That's right, I remember covering that about the Psy-Ops. But the Israel-Gaza charade concluded, it was reported that NATO would pivot back towards Syria, and it has. It says it has handpicked a new proxy regime to act as the face of the terrorists battling Syrian civilians and soldiers alike within the country, while it has been conducting a concerted and refocused propaganda campaign to paint the Syrian government as once again immediately about to fall. So they say it's similar to the Libyan-style Mermaid Dawn is being made by NATO and its terrorist proxies inside Syria in regards to the trickling in that the communications are failing. The hope is that after several months of more terrorism threats, sanctions, and pressure put on the border by both Israel and Golan Heights and Turkey along Syria's north, that this time the trick might work. The link will be posted in YouTube's video description. You can check out the June 12, 2012 article warning regarding NATO psychological operations. It says the information is relevant. It goes on, it says that in a few days, perhaps as early as Friday, June 15th, Syrians watching their TV will be replaced with their screens by TV programs created by the CIA, images showing massacres that are blamed on the Syrian government, people demonstrating, ministers and generals resigning, and Assad fleeing, the rebels gathering in the big city centers, and a new government installing itself in the presidential palace. So we'll see, right? An operation of disinformation. Nowadays, the media does not support a war. They produce it themselves. We've seen that with Libya, as far as Al Jazeera goes, actually telling people to start chanting, when to chant, when to get excited when they go on the air. So we'll return With this article, Syrian government finds rare friends in Latin America when we return. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.